Hey folks, normally on today I would have put out the next episode on the F-16 Red Flag campaign, but like so many other avid DCSers, I was seriously jazzed about the Apache finally being released, and I could hardly wait to get behind the stick and give her a test flight. So what you're going to see here is my very first flight of the Apache. Now I'm not a chopper pilot. Closest thing I've ever done is, well, fly the Huey, also in DCS, and also the SA-342. You know, the French Gazelle. But honestly, I've never gotten much into them, and I don't think I put more than a couple hours into each one. It's not that I don't like them, it's just that aircraft in DCS, the study aircraft, are so intensely and accurately modeled that a person could literally spend years learning them, especially if you really want to master one. And so quite a while back, I chose to focus most of my efforts on the FA-18 and the F-16. There just isn't enough time to truly master all the different aircraft in DCS, even if you made it a full-time job, which, well, that sounds like fun, I just don't have time. And the closest thing to professional experience that I have flying a chopper would be flying drones. I mentioned in one of my earliest videos that I fly drones professionally. I use them for shooting videography. But a modern drone is a world different from a military chopper or a civilian chopper for that matter. Modern drones are very heavily computerized, and the quad-prop drones, which are most popular these days among civilians, for their combination of stability and interesting blend of airplane and helicopter handling characteristics, well, they are pretty well computerized, and you don't have to worry all that much about things like torque setting your bird into a spin, power to the engines, and all that sort of thing. They'll handle it for you, and heck, if you lose control, they will typically realize it and fly themselves back to wherever you are. So for all intents and purposes, I'm pretty much an AH-64D Apache virgin. And I wanted to make this video to show just how flyable the Apache is. Now, it is true, I have, I'm sure, at least a couple thousand hours on the F-16, the FA-18, and with DCS birds in general, but I have never before flown the AH-64D, and it's very handleable, at least if you understand the principles behind helicopter flight. In a nutshell, the propeller makes you go up and down, you add power to the propeller for vertical lift, and you convert some of that vertical lift into directional movement by simply tipping the chopper in that direction. Now, the equivalent of a joystick on a chopper is called the cyclic, and once you're up in the air, that means if you want to go forward, you push the cyclic a little bit forward, the chopper tilts that direction and begins to move forward. In airplanes, whenever you maneuver, whenever you turn, you're trading energy for that turn. You'll notice when you make a turn, your aircraft will slow down, and you have to either compensate by adding to the thrust of the engines or simply accept the loss in velocity till you can rebuild it. It's the same principle behind a chopper. As you tilt into a direction to gain momentum in that direction, you'll trade some lift for directional movement. So the trick is not to tilt too steep, so steep that you end up crashing back into the ground, and you can compensate by adding more power to the prop. Of course, this brings on another problem. The prop on a helicopter is really big. Its spinning creates torque, and that wants to turn the body of the aircraft in the opposite direction, which is why choppers have a small vertical rotor behind them. Typically, not all choppers do. Some modern choppers use gyroscopes to control that, and the old Russian Ka-50 aircraft used a second large rotor up top spinning in the opposite direction. But one way or the other, you have to have something countering that torque. On the AH-64D, the Apache, you have the usual small vertical prop on the tail. So as you add lift, the chopper is going to want to spin more in the opposite direction that the rotor is turning. You need to pay attention to this and counter that by adding force to the tail rotor, which then pushes against the propeller's torque. With some practice, you'll become aware of this. It becomes more of an issue if you need to really add power fast and make a sudden climb, and it becomes less of an issue as you gain speed. You might notice that we're flying pretty level just now, and we're maintaining a speed over 100 knots. Once you get into the 100-knot range, give or take a dozen knots or so, the aircraft really starts to handle a lot more like an airplane, and you need to apply very little rudder control to keep the aircraft flying straight. You just maintain a little tilt forward to keep up your speed, and pitch down to lose altitude, and pitch up to gain altitude, and bank into your turns, a lot like an ordinary airplane. Because, in a sense, once you get really moving, that large prop is also acting like wings. Now, as anyone who's tried flying knows, low altitude flight is difficult, dangerous, and that's why we are hugging the ground here. It would honestly be pretty easy for me to get up to a few hundred feet and just drive this aircraft, so staying right low to the ground is going to force me to practice some skills. And when you are low to the ground, one of the main things you have to watch out for is power lines, trees, and other occasional random things like support cables around cell towers. So just like in combat, you have to keep your head on a swivel and your eyes peeled at all times. Never get so lost in the scenery that you aren't paying attention to what's in front of you, because something as thin as a power line or support cable can appear in front of you as if out of nowhere, leaving you only a few seconds to respond. So what we're going to do is fly roughly east to that crane out there a bit in front of us, and there we're going to do a 180 and fly back to the airbase and see if we can put this bird down. Now anybody who has really flown knows what a challenge it is to land anything, aircraft, helicopter, or anything. There's a reason that pilots say any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. And I find landing in choppers harder than aircraft. Now, that could be simply a matter of practice. I have literally flown aircraft in DCS and other flight simulators for thousands of hours in DCS alone, and I've been using flight simulators for over 20 years. And I'm mostly used to aircraft. I find them pretty straightforward to land, whether I'm coming down on a runway in an F-16 with lots of room to land, or I have to land on the postage stamp that is an aircraft carrier with an FA-18. But landing a helicopter, to me, that's where the real challenge is. A helicopter is very counterintuitive for me. I understand the principles. What I'm going to have to do is slow down, ideally while avoiding gaining too much altitude, so that means I have to decrease power to the prop, while at the same time pulling up to lose speed, and then once I've slowed down, begin a descent toward the ground while making sure that doesn't become so fast that it effectively is a crash, and that I also manage to land someplace safe. I don't expect my landing to be very pretty. I'll be happy if I don't blow up. But I told myself when I decided to screen capture this flight that whatever my first flight looked like, that's what I was going to put up. Anyway, I'll give you a bit of a spoiler. I do alright. It's not a picture-perfect landing, but I do alright. And so once again, I want to bring up, for those of you that are thinking about getting the Apache, I've seen already in a few videos where some persons have said it's super complicated and maybe you should try other things first. Hey, you know what? If I can fly this bird first time around, I'm pretty sure that you can get a hang of it too, because I have virtually no experience in helicopter sims. Like I said, I've messed with the SA-342 and the Huey, but honest to God, I really don't think I've put in 5 hours between the two of them. And everything else I know about how helicopters work, I've gleaned that from simple study. So we've made our turn around the crane and we're now heading back toward the airbase. On the flight back, I'll just share a little HOTUS setup information. I used Matt Wagner's very helpful video for setting up my HOTUS. Some of you might know that Matt works with DCS to produce instructional videos, and his videos are typically very good. I found it very helpful, though I would very much have appreciated some sort of image to serve as a model on how to lay out the HOTUS. However, with some digging around, I was able to find some photos of the actual collectives and cyclics from the Apache, and that was very helpful. And I came across some recommended Apache HOTUS setups from older flight simulators. And I just put that bit of differing information together to create my HOTUS setup. So I'm not going to claim what I have right now is the best. In fact, I think of it as just a hodgepodge collection of buttons and whatnot, but I have laid it out similar to the aircraft that I'm familiar with, in so much as possible. As long as you have a grip with at least 4 four-way hats and 3 or 4 buttons, you should be okay. It would help if you have an extra axis lever or two, like you find on grips such as the VKB MCE or the Virpil Constellation. Though I think even the Thrustmaster grip would work fine. And for a throttle, well, the Warthog Thrustmaster throttle, or the Thrustmaster TWCS, or something like the Orion from Windwing, any of those look like they'll work fine. You just need lots of button switches and axes. But that's pretty standard for any study-level modern aircraft. Now the Apache is a 2-seat chopper. If you're flying the role of the pilot, there is an AI who handles all the shooting. And his name is George, and he seems to be pretty cooperative and competent. He does need some guidance though, and there are 2 ways you can guide George. If you have a grip with enough extra hats, you can set up a 4-way hat specifically to give instructions to George on things like when to shoot and how much ordnance to use. I have a feeling you're going to be calling on George so much that it's best just to have that on a hat. But if you have a grip that doesn't have so many controls, you can make up to a degree for the slack with a voice attack. I've mentioned voice attack in a previous video, and I consider it absolutely essential for DCS, especially with the Vacom add-on. These 2 apps together not only allow you to do all of your voice comms by speaking as if you were doing actual voice comms, but they can easily make up for a lack of buttons too, especially in this case if you need to give George some instructions. Now another note, just on graphics, I noticed as soon as I turned the simulator on that the graphics were quite choppy, and I couldn't figure out why. I hadn't changed anything, and neither my Windows nor the graphics card had done any updates, and normally the graphics with the previous settings were smooth as silk. Then I realized the problem was that the Apache flies so low to the ground, you really are in a chopper hugging the earth a lot. And it occurred to me the choppiness, especially this low to the ground, probably had a lot to do with my very high graphics setting that I keep my computer set at. What can I say? I like DCS to look good, and it looks beautiful. But the choppiness was ugly. I couldn't deal with it. So I went to DCS options, under System, down to Visibility Range, which I had set on Extreme. Flying a few hundred to a few thousand feet up, that worked just fine, but all the detail flying low to the ground, it's just not going to fly, at least not with my 3070 video card. And I just simply changed the visibility range from Extreme down to Ultra. And, well, as you can see right in front of you, the graphics are still beautiful. The difference is almost unnoticeable. I honestly can't see the difference. But it did smooth the choppiness right out. I went from maybe 20 to 25 frames back up to about 90 with that one little change. I'm sure it'll slow down and become choppier when I get into a busy combat theater, but for now this is good, and even if the frames slow down to around 60 in a combat theater, I'm good with that. I'm not one of those people that obsesses about how many frames my video card is showing, and I need to have it giving me a constant 300 frames to be happy. If the graphics look smooth, I'm cool with it. Alright, we're nearly back to the Air Force Base, and I got so wrapped up in filming this video that I wasn't really paying attention and let my altitude get up a bit too high. But that's okay, we're only up a few hundred feet, it won't take that long to bleed it off. In fact, slowing down and coming down are the least of my concerns. My real concern is slowing down and coming down in a way that I don't end up going boom. I'd like to tell you I'm going to put her gracefully down on a runway, and I'd like to tell you that I pulled that off. I didn't. In truth, it wasn't even really my goal here. My goal was to land in the vicinity of the airport because I know how hard it is to land a chopper from that brief time playing with the SA-342 and the Huey. I mean, like, in the sim, if you see one of those guys demonstrating at landing a Huey on the chopper pad of a Navy ship, buy that guy a cup of coffee if you see him sometime, because that's quite a skill. They work to earn that. But anyway, I did manage to keep control of the aircraft, bleed off that speed and altitude, keep from coming down so fast it was effectively a crash, and keep the chopper from flying off into some uncontrolled mayhem. I even managed to put her down someplace safe. So for me, for the very first flight ever, that's pretty much a win. And while I have a great deal of respect for my DCS friends and peers who love DCS themselves and also offer videos on it, I am just going to say that, again, honestly, if I can fly this bird successfully the first time, then you can too. Don't be afraid of it. You will need a HOTAS though. Some persons manage to do DCS using something like an Xbox controller, and a few manage to get by in it even just using a keyboard and a mouse, but I honestly don't know how they do it, and I can't see how it could be pulled off with something like the Apache. Maybe I'm wrong, you tell me. But I think as long as you have a decent HOTAS and rudder pedals, and you're willing to put in some time and study and practice, you'll be fine. Yeah, you'll doubtless be up and flying in very little time, and then you can have fun for months or even years learning the bird's systems. That's one of the things I love about DCS. I've been doing it for 10 years, and every time I turn it on, I learn something new.